Welcome to Lust Through the Ages, where history takes off its corset. This is the first episode of what I hope will be a long and satisfying journey, and I'm so grateful you're here at the beginning of it. I've always been a lover of words and research, so this podcast indulges both my obsessions. In a time when books are still being banned, I thought it might be interesting, and maybe a little daring, to look back at the stories that once shocked the world and what they still have to say about us today. For this first session, we're heading into my favorite era, the Italian Renaissance. It's the world I write in, the one I read in, and the one that never quite lets go once you enter it. I'm Willa A. Jones, longtime editor, writer, and NASA nerd. You can learn more about me at willamajones.com. Under the podcast tab, you'll find show notes, links, and a glossary for some of the Italian words you'll hear along the way. Pronunciation and meaning included, because love deserves accuracy. Here's how this works. Each week, we'll go where history gets a little wicked and literature refuses to behave. I'll start with some context. That's the researcher in me. And then I'll read a passage from a historical text that dared to talk about desire. Finally, I'll share a bit of commentary, what it meant then, what it says now, and why it still makes us blush. We're starting with the one who practically invented scandal in print, Pietro Aretino. His dialogues weren't just naughty stories whispered behind fans. They were among the first erotic conversations ever printed in the European vernacular. Witty, worldly, and unapologetically curious about how desire works in real life. Centuries later, scholars would call this kind of writing the whore dialogues genre. Back then, Aretino just called it honesty, and the church called it blasphemy. When his books landed on the index of prohibited books, it wasn't just about sex. It was the first real showdown between the printing press and moral control, between art, appetite, and authority. Before we open Aretino's first dialogue, let's step into the world he was writing about, where convents were less about piety and more about politics, power, and passion. By the 1530s, Venice had more convents than gondolas. Daughters of noble families were donated to God the way you might deposit jewels in a vault, safely kept, out of sight, and conveniently off the marriage market. Some were pious, many were simply pragmatic. And once the gates closed, the rules of the outside world began to blur. Aretino saw the irony and turned it into theater. The Life of Nuns, the first of his dialogues, is a wicked little masquerade in which Nanna, a worldly courtesan, tells young Antonia what really happens behind convent walls. Spoiler, not all confessions end with repentance. His satire drips with double meanings. The nuns in his telling are part victims, part rebels, women trapped by circumstance but inventive enough to find loopholes in the vows of chastity and obedience. Aretino wasn't mocking faith, he was mocking hypocrisy, the pious facade that lets sin flourish in private. Picture it. Candlelight on frescoed walls, incense thick as secrets, and women's voices finally unbound. What Aretino wrote wasn't blasphemy, it was a revelation, under every habit, a very human heart. Confession time. If you thought convents were all silence and saintliness, Aretino is about to prove you wrong. Nanna, ever the expert in life's less holy pleasures, will guide Antonia and us through a world where devotion meets desire. So pour yourself a glass of something forbidden, and let's open the book that taught the Renaissance how to talk about pleasure out loud. You can press pause here because you might want to take a moment to get settled. Now, I want you to picture a fig tree. Its branches are heavy with ripened fruit, their scent sweet and faintly musky in the warm Roman air. The afternoon sun slips through wide leaves, dappling the ground in shifting gold. A fountain murmurs somewhere nearby, that lazy, secret sound that belongs only to summer. Beneath the tree sits Nanna, her gown loosened, her laughter richer than the wine in her cup. Beside her, Antonia leans forward, eyes wide, a mix of innocence and curiosity. Around them, the city hums, bells, birds, a distant prayer. But here in the shade, time slows. It is a place for honesty, for confession, for the kind of stories whispered when no one else is meant to hear. Let's begin. What's troubling you, Nanna? Do you think that woe-besmeared face befits a woman who rules the world? The world, you say? Yes, the world. Leave the worries to me, who, save for the greetings of the French pox, can't even get a bark from a dog. I'm poor and proud, and if I were also to call myself depraved, I would hardly be sinning against the Holy Ghost. My dear Antonia, there are troubles for everyone, and so many of them. Just where you'd imagine there would be joys, that you'd be astonished. Take my word for it, this world is a filthy place. You are right. This world is filthy, but for me, not for you. Why, you can afford the most fantastic delicacies, and everywhere in all the piazzas and taverns one hears nothing but none of this and none of that. Your house is always packed like an egg, and all Rome dances around you, the way Hungarians foot it at the Jubilee. And so it is, yet I am not happy. I feel like a bride who, though famished and sitting at the head of a table laden with all sorts of food, doesn't dare eat because of a certain shyness. Yes, yes, sister, my heart is not where it should be. Ah, what's the use? So you sigh, eh? Ah, you do wrong to sigh. Watch out, or the Lord God may give you a good reason for sighing. How can I help it, now that my Pippa has turned 16 and I must decide her future? They're all on my neck. One person tells me, make her a nun. Just think, besides saving the 3/4 of her dowry, you'll be adding another saint to the calendar. Another says marry her off. After all, you're so rich you won't even miss what she takes away with her. And others urge me to set her up right off as a courtesan. This world is rotten anyway, they say. And even if it becomes a proper one, by making her a courtesan, they'll also be making her a lady. And what with what you own and she will soon be earning, she will become a veritable queen. And all their advice has driven me out of my wits. So you see, Nanna has her troubles too. For a great woman like you, such troubles are sweeter than a light rash to a man who, in the evening, standing before the fire, drops his pants and feels his mouth fill with water at the pleasurable thought of a good scratch ahead. No, Real troubles are to see the grain go up in price. Real torments to watch the wine get scarce. Real torture to have to pay the rent. And real death to dose yourself with quiacum 2 or 3 times a year, and still not to boil and depustule yourself or get rid of the pain. I'm really surprised at you, bothering your head over such trifles. Why surprised? Because you were born and raised in Rome. Should be able to dispatch your doubts about Pippa with your eyes closed. Tell me, weren't you a nun? Yes. Didn't you have a husband? I did. And weren't you a courtesan? I was, and I am. Well then, don't you have the strength of spirit to choose the best of the 3? Mother of God, I don't. Why not? Because nowadays nuns, wives, and whores live different lives from what they used to. Ha! Life has always been lived in the same way. People have always eaten, have always drunk, have always slept, have always looked, have always lain awake, have always gone and always stayed, and women have always pissed through the crack. Now I would dearly love you to tell me about the lives of nuns, wives, and whores of your days. And I swear by the 7 churches that I have vowed to visit this coming Lent that I shall settle in a jiffy what you must do with your girl. Now, look here, you, who are what you are because you are so wise, must first tell me why making her a nun has you so worried. Agreed. Tell me, I beg you, since in any case this is the feast day of Magdalene, our patroness, when our particular work is not done, and even if it were, I have enough bread, wine, and cured meat to last us for 3 days. Oh, you do? Yes. Well, today I shall tell you the life of the nuns, tomorrow the life of the wives, and the day after that the life of the whores. Sit down here beside me and make yourself comfortable. I am ready. Begin. To start with, I feel like cursing the soul of Monsignor won't say who relived this body of a girlish inconvenience. Oh, don't let that upset you now. My dear Antonia, becoming a nun, a wife, or a whore is like a crosswords. When you reach it, you stop for a long while and reflect on which road to take. But often the devil drags you down the worst, as he dragged my father's blessed soul the day he made me a nun, even against my mother's wishes. Holy be her memory. Ah, now there was a woman. You must have known her. I knew her almost in a dream. I know, because I heard it said, that she performed miracles in a house behind Via de' Bianchi. I also heard that your father, who was a friend and informer of the police, married her for love. Oh, please don't remind me of my sorrow, for Rome was no longer Rome when it was robbed of so perfect a couple. But to return to my story, on the 1st of May, Monna Marietta, that was my mother's name, although, due to her charms, people called her Beautiful Tina. And Ser Barbaraccio, my father, after having gathered all their kinfolk, uncles and aunts, grandparents and cousins, nephews and brothers, together with a crowd of male and female friends, led me to the monastery's church. I was dressed all in silk, my waist girt with gray amber baubles, and on my head a golden coif over which rested the crown of virginity, woven out of roses and violets. I wore perfumed gloves and velvet slippers, and if I remember rightly, the pearls round my neck and the gown down my back belonged to Pagnina, who had just entered the order of the converted. They couldn't have been anyone else's. So, richly adorned like a new bride, I entered the church, which was thronged with thousands of people. As soon as I appeared, they all turned to look at me, and one man cried, "What a lovely bride the Lord Almighty is getting!" And another man said, "What a pity to make a nun of such a beautiful young girl!" Some blessed me,
Others drank me in with their eyes, and still another man said, "Well, anyway, she'll make a fine New Year's feast for some monk." But I didn't think his words were meant to be malicious. Just then I heard some ardent sighs, which I could recognize by their pitch as coming from the heart of my lover, who never stopped wailing all through the ceremony.
"What? You had lovers before becoming a nun?"
Only a fool wouldn't have had them, but there was no sex. Now I was seated before the other women, and after I had sat there for a while, they began to sing the mass. When this was over, I knelt before my mother Tina and my aunt Champolina, and a clerk played a brief laude on the organ. After the mass and the blessing of my nun's robes, which lay on the altar, the priest who had read the epistle and the other priest who had sung the gospel both lifted me to my feet and made me kneel again on the predella of the main altar. Then the priest who had said mass sprinkled me with holy water, and after having chanted with the other priests the Te Deum Laudamus and perhaps 100 other psalms, they removed my worldly clothes and clad me in spiritual garb. All the people began jostling and pushing, making a noise that sounded just like the noise one hears in St. Peter's or St. John's when some woman, out of insanity, despair, or cunning, gets herself welled in, as I did once myself.
Yes, yes, I can just see you hemmed in by that mob.
When the ceremony was over, and after they had given me the incense, together with the bendicamus and the oramus and the alleluia, a door swung open with the grating groan a poor box makes when you lift the lid. I was brought to my feet and led to the door where 20 nuns and the abbess were waiting for me. When I saw the abbess, I dropped a pretty curtsy, and she kissed me on the forehead and mumbled something to my father, mother, and relatives, who were all weeping like fountains. Then suddenly that door slammed behind me, and I heard a loud, "Alas!"
From whom did that alas come?
From my wretched lover. The very next day he turned observant monk or Franciscan friar, if they told me the truth.
Miserable creature.
When that door shut so abruptly that I didn't even have time to say goodbye to my family, I was sure that I was stepping alive and breathing into the grave, and imagined that I would see women half dead from austerity and fasting. So now I no longer wept for my parents, but for myself, walking with my eyes glued to the floor and my thoughts on what fate had in store for me. I reached the refectory, where a bevy of nuns ran to embrace me, each of them calling me their dear little sister, which induced me to lift my head a bit. And when I saw those fresh, gleaming, rosy faces, I took heart, and, gazing at them with more assurance, said to myself, "Surely the devils are not as ugly as they are painted." And at that moment in came a troop of monks, friars, and a few laymen, the most handsome, well-groomed, gay young men I have ever laid eyes on. And each man seized his darling by the hand, and all of them together looked like the angels who lead the dances in heaven.
Leave heaven out of this.
Well, let's say they look like lovers romping with their nymphs.
That's a more seemly comparison. Go on.
So they took their sisters by the hand and gave them the loveliest kisses on this earth, even vying with each other to see who could give the most honeyed ones.
And who did, in your opinion?
The monks, without a doubt.
And why?
You can find the reason in the poem The Wandering Whore of Venice.
And then?
Then they all sat down to one of the most delicate feasts I believe I have ever come across. My lady the abbess sat in the place of honor with the abbot on her left, and behind the abbess sat the treasurer nun, and alongside her the bachelor. Opposite them sat the nun sacristan, and next to her the master of novices. Then there followed in a row a sister, a monk, a layman, and at the foot of the table countless clerks and little friars. I myself was placed between the convent's preacher and confessor. So then the food arrived, the sort of food that, I assure you, the Pope in person has never tasted. At the first assault, On it all talk was laid aside, so much so that you would have said the word silence, posted wherever monks take their meals, had mastered all mouths, or better, all tongues. Indeed, their mouths were making the mumbling noise silkworms make when fully grown, and after a long fast they devour the leaves of the tree in whose shade poor Pyramus and Thisbe played their little games. May God be with them in the next world as he was in this one.
You mean the leaves of the white mulberry tree?
Ha ha ha!
What are you laughing at now?
I'm laughing at a shameless friar, God forgive me. While his jaws were working away like two grindstones and his cheeks bulged like a man blowing a trumpet, he brought a bottle to his lips and guzzled it down to the last drop.
Dominie, drown him.
When they began to feel sated, they started to chatter away. And halfway through the feast, I thought I was in the market in Piazza Navona, surrounded by the gabble of some customers haggling with some Jews. When they began picking and choosing the tender tops of chicken wings, combs, and heads, and offering them to each other, they looked just like swallows filling the beaks of their young. And I couldn't even begin to tell you how they roared with laughter when they presented the capon's ass, nor could I recount all the wrangling this caused.
How revolting!
I felt like retching when I saw one of the nuns chew up a mouthful and then offer it straight from her mouth to the mouth of her friend.
The trollop!
Now that the pleasure of eating had turned into that peculiar sadness that overtakes some men right after performing a certain act, they began to imitate the Germans, proposing toasts and brandishing their glasses. The convent's general picked up a huge tumbler of Corso wine, asked the abbess to follow suit, and then swigged it down like a false sacrament. All eyes now glistened from too much drink, like those silver studs on the corners of mirrors, or were misted by the wine like a diamond is by the breath, and soon would have shut, and the entire company would have dozed off over their food, changing that table into bed, if just then a fine-looking young fellow hadn't arrived. He carried in his hands a basket covered with the whitest, thinnest linen imaginable. Was it snow? Frost? Milk? It outshone the moon in whiteness, the moon when it is full.
What did he do with the basket, and what was in it?
Don't hurry me. Bowing in the Neapolitanized Spanish style, the boy said, "Good health to your lordships," and then added, "A servant of this merry band sends you fruit from the earthly paradise." Then he uncovered the gift and set it on the table. At once a roar of laughter arose that sounded like thunder. The whole table burst out laughing, just like a poor family burst into tears at seeing their father close his eyes forever.
What apt and natural comparisons you make!
No sooner were those fruits of paradise seen than the hands of both sexes, already engaged in conversation with one another's thighs, tits, flutes, and bags, lunged for them with the dexterity of pickpockets emptying a blockhead's purse, or as the mob dives for the candles thrown from the loggia of St. John of Lateran on Candlemas Day.
And what sort of fruits were they? What? Tell me.
They were those glass fruits made in Murano near Venice to look like a prick, except that these had two large dangling bells that would have done honor to a tambourine.
Ha ha! I got it by the beak. I'm clutching it.
And blessed, not just lucky, was the woman who grabbed the biggest, thickest fruit, nor did a single one of them forget to kiss hers, saying as she did, "These little things abate the temptations of the flesh."
May the devil destroy their seed.
And all the while I was acting the pure country lass, stealing glances at the glass fruit like a crafty cat that keeps one eye on the servant, while with its paw it tries to snatch the piece of meat she's carelessly left untended. And if the sister at my side, after snatching two, hadn't given me one so as not to appear greedy, I would certainly have taken one myself. To put an end to the turmoil, the abbess, laughing and talking, rose to her feet, and so did everyone else. And the blessing she said at the table was in the vernacular.
Forget the blessing. When you left the table, where did you go?
Now I'll tell you. We walked into a parlor on the ground floor, a large, airy parlor covered with paintings.
Paintings? What kind? The penances of Lent? Or something of that order?
Penances? Not on your life. Those paintings would have made a hypocrite stop and stare. The room had 4 walls. On the first wall was depicted the life of Saint Nafisa, the patron saint of whores. And there you saw the good girl at the age of 12, overflowing with charity, handing out her dowry to police spies, card sharps, parsons, footmen, and all such deserving persons. Finally, when her wealth was all gone, she sat down full of compassion and humility, take my word for it, right in the middle of the Sisto Bridge, with neither pomp nor trappings except for her stool, her straw mat, her little dog, and a shirred slip of paper held at the end of a split stick, with which she seemed to be fanning herself and chasing away flies.
And why was she sitting on the stool?
She was performing the pious work of covering the naked. And young as she was, as I've told you, she sat there with her head held high and her mouth open, so you would have said she was singing that song. What is my love doing that he does not come? She was also painted standing up and facing a man who was ashamed and did not dare ask her for her little thing. Yet she, so kind and so gay, went right to him and led him to her cell, where she consoled the afflicted. First, she took off all his clothes, peeled off his pants and socks, and uncovered his little partridge. She made such a fuss over it that it was carried away by sheer pride and plunged between her legs with the fury of a stallion that breaks his halter and hurls himself on a mare. But, feeling herself unworthy to look straight at it, or perhaps, as the preacher said when expounding her life for us, not having the courage to look at it when it became so red, so steaming hot and inflamed, she turned her back to it magnificently.
May her soul be rewarded.
Well, wasn't it? After all, she's a saint.
True enough.
How could I tell you everything? There I saw painted the people of Israel, whom she graciously took in and always satisfied for the love of God. Some of them, as you could see, after having tasted what was in there, left her carrying a fistful of coins that the kindness of others had forced on her. So those who had labored over her were like guests in the house of some generous host who not only welcomes you, feeds you, and gives you new clothes, but also provides you with the wherewithal to complete your journey.
Ah, blessed, irreproachable Lady Saint Nafisa, inspire me to follow in your holy footsteps.
So in conclusion, all that she ever did behind and before that front door and that back one is drawn as natural as life, and even her last moments are portrayed. At her burial are depicted all the Italians she stowed away in this world so as to meet them in the next. And a maize salad isn't as full of as many different kinds of greens as there were screws in her coffin.
Anyway, I'd love to see one of those paintings. Well, that escalated quickly, didn't it? We start with a young woman, wide-eyed and curious about the sacred life, and before long, Nanna's describing a convent that sounds a lot more like a masquerade ball with better acoustics. And then those paintings, sensual, scandalous, and absolutely dripping with irony. The church may have condemned Aretino's words, but his characters were already holding a mirror to the hypocrisy no sermon dared mention. What Aretino's really doing here is revealing how thin the veil was, literally and figuratively. Behind every wall built to contain women's virtue, desire was still alive and kicking.
The men who funded those frescoes wanted beauty that inspired devotion. What they got was temptation immortalized in oil and plaster. And Aretino just said it out loud. That's part of his genius and his danger. He made women's conversations public, even though these voices came from his imagination. They sounded too real. The laughter, the sarcasm, the exasperation, all of it broke the illusion that women were passive, pious, or content. You can practically feel the centuries of frustration pouring through Nanna's every line. And yet, what's delightful is that he lets her be funny. She's not tragic or punished. She's clever, amused, and absolutely unrepentant. She knows exactly what she's doing, and she invites Antonia and us to stop pretending that holiness cancels humanity. Think of it as Renaissance realism with a wink. He's saying, look, we all know what goes on behind closed doors. Why not admit it and laugh? So when you heard that bit about the paintings, remember, that's Aretino's sly rebellion. Art was supposed to save souls. He used it to expose them. And that's where we'll pause, right at the edge of the frescoes where brushstrokes start to blur into temptation. Next week, we'll stay right here under the fig tree as Nanna continues her confessions. Deeper in the convent, bolder in her truths, and absolutely unfiltered. Because this month belongs to the nuns, and trust me, they have plenty left to confess. If you've enjoyed Lust Through the Ages, please tap follow or subscribe so you never miss a murmur or a wink. And if you tell a friend or leave a quick review, you'll have my heartfelt thanks. It's how this little rebellion keeps spreading, one whisper at a time. Until then, keep your candles lit, your laughter wicked, and your curiosity wide open.